Hello again, everyone. Tonight's story follows Elias, a stubborn human chef who opens a tiny stall in the orc capital, and Queen Majura, the terrifying ruler who keeps returning for his food. In a city of iron, scars, and thunder, one warm bowl turns hunger into trust and a soft, quiet kind of love.
By the third morning, Elias Venn had learned that nothing in Varkazul was made for a man of ordinary height except the rats, and even those looked well fed enough to negotiate rent. The orc capital rose around him in black terraces and red banners, carved into the ribs of 3 mountains and widened by generations who believed a street should fit 2 war beasts passing without apology. The market district alone could have swallowed his hometown square, and still had room for a wrestling pit, a public execution platform, and 9 stalls selling axes by weight. Smoke climbed from iron braziers large enough to bathe in. Vendors shouted with battlefield lungs. Chains clanked, hides slapped stone, blades rang, and somewhere nearby a creature with 4 horns was being sold as a pet. Elias stood under his narrow canvas awning, one hand on the handle of his soup pot, and told himself that this was merely a difficult start. It was a lie, but he had seasoned worse things. His stall occupied the smallest permitted square of rented market stone, squeezed between a woman who sold cured war-boar flanks by the tusk, and a scarred old orc who sharpened swords while singing lullabies with alarming tenderness. Elias had painted his stall sign himself because the sign-maker had quoted a price that assumed he owned a mine. The letters were clean, blue, and human-sized, which meant no one could read them unless they crouched. It said "The Little Hearth," partly because his mother's first kitchen had been called that, and partly because every other honest name he had considered, such as terrible mistake, unpaid debt, or please do not step on me, had seemed bad for business. He wore a spotless white apron that had remained spotless for exactly 14 minutes on his first day before a passing orc child had thrown a beat at a goat and missed. Now it was clean only in intention, which was perhaps more important. He had rolled his sleeves to the elbow, tied back his dark hair with twine, and set out the implements of a trade nobody in Varkazul respected until it produced immediate meat. A copper pot, a flat pan, a small oven made from brick and iron that had taken him 2 days to build because every brick sold in the capital was sized for a hand twice the width of his own. A jar of rendered butter, a sack of onions, barley, apples, marjoram, black pepper worth more than his boots. 3 hens he had bought alive and apologized to before doing what cooks must do. "Low heat first," he murmured, slicing onions with steady, economical motions while the market roared around him. "No, not a funeral pyre. We are coaxing sweetness. We are not attacking the onion. The onion has done nothing to deserve Varkazul." An orc passing by slowed, stared at the pan, and grunted. "Why cut meat so small? It's an onion." The orc looked offended on behalf of meat everywhere, and moved on. Elias exhaled through his nose. Excellent, another satisfied non-customer. He had come to the capital with 3 crates, 1 contract, and a very human misunderstanding of how far legal stubbornness could carry a man. In Greyhaven, he had cooked at the River Bell, his mother's old tavern, until a merchant house promised him a 6-month position feeding a diplomatic mission to Varkazul. They had paid him half in advance and taken the other half in goods on credit, including spices, copperware, and travel fees. Then the mission collapsed when the lead envoy broke his leg in a duel with his own mirror, according to rumor, and the merchant house declared the contract void. Elias had been told to return home, accept the debt, and let the River Bell be sold to cover it. Instead, he had read the fine print. If the appointed cook reached Varkazul and operated a licensed food concern for 90 days, the trade bond remained valid, and the merchant house owed the remaining payment. The clause existed for caravan cooks stranded by weather, not for men who used spite as a compass. But ink was ink. So Elias had sold his bed, packed his knives, kissed the doorway of the River Bell, and travelled east with a mule named Bishop, who had looked at the orc capital and refused to enter it. Bishop was now living with a stable master outside the southern gate, and Elias suspected making better choices. For 3 days, Elias sold almost nothing. Orcs bought skewers of half-charred meat from the stall across the lane, bowls of boiled root and liver from a cauldron that smelled like an argument, and raw slabs rubbed with salt crystals the size of teeth. They did not trust steam that smelled of herbs. They did not understand pastry. They asked why soup needed to rest, as though rest were a weakness that soup should overcome. One elderly warrior leaned over his pot, inhaled, and demanded to know where he had hidden the blood. "There is chicken stock," Elias said. "Stock of what? Bones?" The warrior brightened. "And vegetables." The warrior's face closed like a gate. "Before I continue, I'd like to make an announcement. I'll be sharing some really steamy, uncensored orc stories on my Patreon page that I couldn't post on YouTube. You can find the details in the description. Warning, the content is really steamy." By mid-morning of the 3rd day, rain needled through the smoke and turned the black stone slick. Elias lifted his awning with a broom handle to drain water away from the oven, nearly toppled backward, recovered with a dignity that fooled no one, and returned to his pot. That day's dish was his mother's patient stew, renamed mountain barley broth, because patient sounded insulting in a city that complimented babies by saying they screamed like siege captains. It began with onions cooked until they surrendered into gold, garlic crushed, not chopped, bones roasted brown, barley toasted in butter, root vegetables, a sliver of apple, black pepper, bay, and enough time for the broth to become something that held warmth like a promise. He was whispering to the pot about manners when his first real customer arrived. The orc was not small, because no adult orc in Varkazul was small by any fair measurement, but he was smaller than the others around him, narrow in the shoulders, and young enough that his tusks still looked slightly surprised to be there. He had one scar across his chin, probably earned from falling rather than fighting, and a suspicious squint aimed at Elias's ladle. "How much?" the young orc asked. Elias named the price, modest by human standards and laughably tiny by market ones. "For water with seeds?" "For broth with barley. Barley is seed. By that logic, beer is wet bread." The orc blinked. The sword sharpener stopped singing. Elias's mouth continued, as it often did when survival suggested silence. "That was not an insult to beer. I respect beer. Some of my closest mistakes involved beer." The young orc stared another moment, then barked one short laugh, startling himself. He slapped a copper piece onto the counter with enough force to make the spoons jump. "1." Elias served the stew in a clay bowl scaled for human hands, which made it look like a medicine cup between the orc's fingers. He added 3 crisp onions from the edge of the pan and a torn piece of flatbread brushed with garlic butter. The orc took the bowl as if accepting a dare. He sniffed. His brow furrowed. He drank too quickly, burned his tongue, and made a sound like a gate hinge surrendering. "Hot," Elias said helpfully. The orc glared at him with watery eyes. "Temperature, not spice. Very different enemy." The young orc waited. He blew on the spoon. He tasted again. The expression that moved across his face was not pleasure at first. It was betrayal. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. He looked down into the bowl as though the barley had personally undermined his world view. "This is soft," he said. "Yes. It has no blood. No. It tastes—" He scowled. "It tastes like after battle, when you sit by fire and no one speaks because everyone is too tired to boast." Elias rested both hands on the counter. "That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me all week." "It is not a compliment. I am choosing to live in a world where it is." The young orc finished the bowl. Then he bought another, claiming it was for his cousin. He ate that one too while standing with his back to Elias, perhaps so the market would not witness the collapse of tradition. Before leaving, he pointed a thick finger at the pot. "You are strange, little cook. I've been called worse by tax collectors. I will tell no one." By sundown, 6 orcs had come by to see the strange broth the young one had sworn not to mention. 2 bought bowls while explaining loudly that they were only confirming weakness. 1 returned the bowl empty and asked whether Elias had a version with more pepper, because his grandmother had more courage than this stew. Elias, who had learned in taverns that insult was sometimes an undecided compliment, added pepper until the broth bit back. The orc drank it, grunted, and purchased 2 more portions. By the 5th day, the market had developed a relationship with the little hearth that could best be described as hostile curiosity. Elias still did not make enough to feel safe, but he made enough to buy bones and flour without bargaining with his dignity. His neighbors began watching him less like a doomed insect and more like a puzzle that might produce soup. The Warboar woman, whose name was Grutha, and whose arms could have carried his whole stall away without shifting her pipe from her teeth, informed him that his fire was too low. "It is meant to be low," Elias said. "Fire should know it is fire. So should temper. Yet here we are." Grutha stared at him. Then she laughed so hard her hanging flanks shook on their hooks. After that, she occasionally tossed him bones that were too small for her customers, which meant bones as long as Elias's forearm. He roasted them until the marrow loosened and folded the richness into stews that made the air around his stall thicker, rounder, less like smoke, and more like home remembering itself. The first time Queen Majura Karag passed through the lower market, Elias was arguing with a sack of flour. The sack was not winning, but it was putting up a respectable fight. It had been stored on a shelf shoulder high for orcs, and therefore somewhere near the weather for him. He had climbed a barrel to reach it, hooked one arm around the shelf, and attempted to drag the sack down by degrees. It shifted all at once, struck his chest, and took him with it. He landed in a burst of white dust so complete that for a breath he looked like a ghost who had died baking. The procession stopped. Elias, flat on his back, opened one eye and saw boots. Many boots. Iron-shod, polished, arranged with military certainty. Behind them, the market quieted in a way it never did for rain or injury or common sense. Someone dropped a chain. Someone else hissed a word Elias did not know, then but would later learn meant both kneel and do not be noticed breathing. He sat up slowly, flour sliding from his hair. At the center of the halted procession stood a woman taller than any orc he had yet seen, though height was the least of what made space gather around her. Her skin was a deep, vivid green, marked by ceremonial scars along her jaw, throat, and strong, bare arms. Her black hair was braided close and bound with dark iron. Armor sat on her, not as decoration, but as language. A wolf-grey cloak hung from one shoulder, her tusks were capped in silver, and her face gave away nothing at all. Elias, covered in flour, holding a wooden scoop like a weapon designed by cowards, thought, important. Then he thought, possibly queen. Then, because panic always made him specific, he thought, the queen has flour on her left boot. Majura Karag, ruler of Varkazul, breaker of the Red Ridge siege, claimant of the Black Throne by challenge, vote, and 3 very dead objections, had not intended to stop. She was cutting through the lower market on the way to Judgment Hall, aware of steel, animal heat, wet stone, old blood under new rain, and smoke from 2 green wood. Then another scent reached her. Not blood, not char, not salt, but something golden and slow. Not blood, not char, not the aggressive salt of cured meat. Something golden and slow. Onions surrendered into sweetness. Bone broth deepened with patience. Butter on bread. Pepper warmed, not burned. It reached into her like a hand touching a door she had believed sealed. She stopped before she meant to. Her guard stopped because she did. The small human on the ground stared at her, with eyes the color of steeped tea and an expression of sincere, flour-coated disaster. "Apologies," he said, scrambling up. "I was negotiating with inventory." No one laughed. The guard nearest him tightened his grip on a spear. Majura looked at the pot, not the man. If she looked at the man, she suspected he might continue speaking, and something about the day suggested she had little strength for novelty. "What is that?" Elias followed her gaze. "Stew." One of her generals made a contemptuous noise. "Human mush." "Yes," Elias said before wisdom could catch him, "but with structure." The spear grip tightened further. Elias wondered whether Bishop the mule missed him. Majura lifted one hand, and the guard became stone. "Serve it." "Of course." Elias reached for a bowl, wiped flour from his wrist, reached for another bowl because the first now looked as if it had been dredged through a mill, and ladled carefully. He added the crisp onions, the flatbread, and after one glance at the woman's face, a little extra black pepper. Not enough to show off, enough to acknowledge that she lived in a city that respected challenge. She took the bowl. It seemed absurdly small in her hand. She did not sit. Queens did not sit at human market stalls. Queens did not eat unknown food in public from men who had recently lost fights to flour. Her court would have had opinions. Her enemies would have had poems. She tasted it anyway. The first spoonful was hot, thick enough to coat the tongue, bright at the edges with pepper, then sweet from the onions, then deep with roasted bone and barley. It was not ceremonial. It was not medicine disguised as strength. It did not announce loyalty, fertility, victory, mourning, alliance, tribute, endurance, or the anniversary of someone else's glorious death. It was simply food made by a person who cared whether the next spoonful made sense after the first. Majura's face did not change. She had trained it not to change under blades, flattery, poison rumors, and grief. But behind her ribs something unclenched so suddenly she nearly hated the stew for it. She finished half the bowl. Not quickly, not slowly, precisely. Then she set a gold mark on the counter. Elias looked at it. "I can't make change for that. I did not ask you to. That is far too much for stew." Her eyes moved to his. They were amber, clear, and dangerous in a way that did not need sharpness. "Then improve your opinion of the stew." Elias closed his mouth. Majura turned and left, carrying the unfinished bowl for 3 steps before apparently realizing she still held it. She gave it to the nearest guard without looking. The guard looked as if he had been handed a sleeping infant with legal complications. For the rest of the day, Elias found himself glancing toward the royal road. For the rest of the day, Majura thought about onions. That, more than anything, angered her. The lower market at dusk was a different creature, less thunderous, more dangerous in small ways. Fires burned lower, vendors counted coins, drunken warriors argued with the affectionate seriousness of men deciding who loved whom enough to break which chair. Elias's stall glowed under a hanging lamp. Steam rose from his pot. He was wiping the counter and talking to a tray of dough circles. "You are not ugly," he told them. "You are rustic. Rustic costs more in some neighborhoods." Majura stopped at the edge of the awning. He looked up. Flour marked one cheekbone. A burn reddened the side of his wrist. He saw the hood, the size, the stance. Recognition flickered through his face and was gone so quickly it almost pleased her. "Evening," he said. "I've got pepper broth, marrow barley, and hand pies with onion, apple, and boar, though I should warn you the pies are an experiment and may be legally considered optimism." Majura lowered her voice. "One broth. No bread." A pause. Bread. He served her without bowing, without shaking, without calling attention to the fact that a disguised monarch stood before him like a thunderstorm trying to pass as weather. This was new. Most people either grovelled or pretended very loudly not to grovel, which was worse. Elias simply ladled broth, added pepper, and placed bread beside it, as if she were a person who had ordered food. Majura took the bowl to the side of the stall where a crate sat under the awning. The crate was human height, which meant it served her as an undignified footrest at best. She stood and ate. The broth was different this time, darker with marrow, the barley swollen but not collapsed. the surface shining with small amber circles of fat. She noticed, to her private irritation, that her shoulders lowered after the third spoonful. Elias busied himself at the oven. He did not stare. He did, however, talk. Rain's holding off, that's something. The bread rose today, which I'm choosing to view as a personal reconciliation. A child asked me if hens are fish because they have bones. I said no, but now I'm not sure I argued well. Your city has large opinions about soup. You speak to everyone this much? She asked. Mostly to food. Food rarely reports me to authorities. People do. Not here yet. Give me time. She looked into the bowl to hide the corner of her mouth, which had considered moving. You are not afraid enough. I am exactly afraid enough. Any more and I'd drop things. Any less and I'd say something stupid. He paused. That sentence was badly timed. Majura ate the last spoonful. The warmth settled low in her, practical and impossible. She set 3 copper pieces on the counter, the proper price. He accepted them with a nod. No comment about gold, no comment about queens. The next evening she returned, and the next. By the end of the second week, the unspoken arrangement had acquired rules. Majura came at dusk or before dawn, sometimes hooded, sometimes merely less royal, with the confidence of someone who misunderstood how recognizable command could be. Elias never asked her name in public, and never mentioned the first day. He served her whatever was best, let her pay fairly, and treated her like a person who had ordered supper instead of a symbol that could have him executed. He learned her by not asking. Sweetness needed smoke, salt made her left eyebrow tighten, pepper pleased her when it arrived like an argument with manners, and before the first bite she always touched the rim of the bowl once, then held the heat for a quiet breath. She learned him too. He hummed when a sauce worked, insulted ingredients but praised knives, and kept lighting his fire in a city that had repeatedly explained why he should fail. The stall changed by inches. Grutha donated bones and pretended they were refuse. Hadrek carved him a stool tall enough to reach shelves built for orc hands. Brooke, the young orc from the first sale, began arriving before noon to ask questions disguised as insults. Elias learned the market back. Warboar fat rendered clean if treated gently. Mountain peppers turned smoky when blackened, and fermented bean paste could deepen gravy if used with the caution normally reserved for explosives. Pepper hand pies appeared, then onion flatbreads, then dumplings with enough chew to satisfy warriors who distrusted tenderness. Orcs came claiming they wished only to judge weakness. They left with full bowls and the offended look of people betrayed by pleasure. Majura saw this from under her hood, and felt something she had not expected. Pride, perhaps, though she had no right to it. Worry, certainly. A human stall becoming popular was safer than a human stall visited only by the Queen, but popularity had its own teeth. Attention gathered. Attention was never empty. One evening the market closed early for a storm blowing down from the northern heights. Rain hammered the awning, turning the alleys into black streams. Elias had banked the fire and was counting coins when Majura appeared without a hood. He looked up, and for once did not speak immediately. She stood in the rain as herself. Armor dark, hair braided, scars silvered by water. No guard visible, though he had no doubt the shadows nearby had opinions. The market seemed to recognize her and hold its breath. "You're wet," he said finally, because eloquence had abandoned him for safer work elsewhere. "Yes. Do queens not have people for that? For rain? For telling rain to stop. They have tried. Rain remains poorly governed." He smiled before he could stop himself. It changed his whole face, softened the careful lines he had built from fatigue and stubbornness. Majura found the sight inconvenient. "Come under the awning," he said. She did. The canvas was too low for her, so she had to incline her head. She did it without complaint, which felt more intimate than a confession. Elias moved the tall stool, then remembered who she was, then remembered who he had been pretending not to know she was, and finally decided to let the stool be a stool. "I've got ember soup left," he said. "Not enough for a public scandal, but enough for poor decisions." What is ember soup? Charred pepper, marrow stock, barley, onions cooked nearly down to jam, and a little vinegar to keep it honest. Soup lies. Constantly if you let it. He served her. She took the bowl and touched the rim with her thumb. He watched the gesture and looked away too late. "You know," she said, "I know many things. For example, if you stack flour above shoulder height, gravity becomes an active political enemy." Elias. It was the first time she had said his name. He became very interested in the ladle. "Yes, I know." "How long?" "Since the second visit. The hood was good. The walking like everyone would move or become furniture was harder to disguise." Thunder rolled. The corner of her mouth moved. "And you said nothing. You were ordering soup. I've found customers dislike being identified as sovereign rulers before supper. That is not why." He set the ladle down. Rain softened the whole market into silver noise. "No, it isn't." She waited. Waiting, he had learned, was one of her methods. It drew truth out of silence because most people rushed to fill it. Unfortunately, Elias was most people with seasoning. "You looked tired," he said. "The first time. Not in the face. Your face is terrifyingly organized. But the way you held the bowl, like it was the first warm thing all day that wasn't demanding something. I thought maybe if I named you, the whole city would come back with your name, so I didn't." Majura looked down into the soup. The steam rose between them, fragrant with smoke and marrow. "You think too much for a cook." That is the cook's curse. People think food begins when hunger arrives. It begins hours earlier, usually with bones and dread. "Why are you here?" He gave a small laugh. "That is a question with layers. The official answer is contract law." "Then give me the answer under it." He leaned back against the counter, arms folded, gaze on the rain beyond her shoulder. "My mother owned a tavern by the river in Greyhaven. She taught me to cook before I could lift the pot. When she died, the debts appeared like rats after a flood. I kept the place alive for 4 years. Then a merchant house hired me for a mission here, cancelled after I had already bought the supplies, and tried to leave me ruined. The contract said if I operated in Varkazul for 90 days, they owed the balance. Everyone told me no human could do it." He shrugged. "I was very tired of everyone being practical at me. So you came alone into a city that might eat you. I hoped metaphorically. It may yet be literal. Yes, but now I have regulars. That makes being eaten socially awkward." Majura did not laugh, but her eyes changed. He began to understand that this was where her laughter lived most of the time, locked behind the fortress of her mouth. "And after 90 days?" she asked. "Go home, pay the debt, keep the river bell if luck develops character." The answer settled between them unpleasantly. Elias heard it after he said it. Go home. The stall, the stool, Grutha's bones, Hadrek's songs, the young orc who now brought cousins, the hooded queen touching warmth before eating. All temporary, according to Ink. Majra ate another spoonful. "And what do you want?" It was such a dangerous question, asked so quietly, that he almost answered with a joke. Instead, he wiped his hands on his apron, though they were clean. "I want my mother's kitchen not to become a wine shop for men who call soup rustic because they can't taste grief. I want to cook without begging creditors for permission. I want—" He stopped. "I want to stop proving that I deserve to stand near my own fire." Mazura's grip tightened on the bowl. Elias looked embarrassed by his own honesty. "That was more answer than you ordered." "No," she said. "It was the correct portion." He glanced at her then. For one moment, without hood or court or the arrangement of distance, she looked not smaller but nearer. Still queen. Still dangerous. But also a woman standing under a too low awning in the rain, eating soup because it tasted good, and because someone had seen her tiredness and not tried to use it. "My turn?" he asked before courage could leave. Her brow lifted. "Why come here, really?" Majura could have said hunger, curiosity, concern for market taxes. She could have reminded him that queens did not explain themselves to cooks. All true, all useless. "In the palace," she said, "every meal is an argument wearing sauce." Elias went still. "If I eat venison from the western clans, the northern clans count portions. If I refuse ceremonial liver, priests whisper of omens. Before war councils, I am given food for strength. After victories, food for glory. At funerals, food for endurance. Nothing is simply food. Nothing arrives without meaning someone else has chosen." She looked at the bowl in her hands. "Here," I ask. "You serve. It tastes of what it is." Elias swallowed. "I'm sorry." "Do not be. I have executed men for pity spoken worse than that." "Noted. Also your bread is good. That part I will accept without fear." They stood through the storm, while the ember soup cooled. He explained vinegar and onions. She explained that victory feasts used bitter herbs because old war leaders believed pleasure made soldiers slow. He confessed that he talked to Doe because Doe responded better to encouragement than people. She admitted that as a child she had hidden in a smokehouse to avoid a ceremonial meal and been found asleep behind hanging boar ribs. He laughed, and she looked at him as if the sound had crossed a border without papers. When she left, Elias cleaned the bowl slowly, understanding only that something had changed, and that food, once served, could not be taken back. The court noticed in the third week, because courts were machines built to turn small human habits into public danger. Minister Vosek of the Narrow Eye came at noon with 2 clerks, a face like folded parchment, and the manner of a man who taxed even his own thoughts before spending them. Elias was preparing hand pies, sealing chopped war boar, onion, apple, and pepper inside buttered dough. Vosek did not look at the food first. That was how Elias knew the visit would not be pleasant. "You are attracting royal attention," Vosek said. "The market is public," Elias replied, pressing the edge of a pie with a fork. "So are unfortunate accidents involving flour. Do not be clever. That happens accidentally when I am frightened." Vosek leaned close enough for Elias to smell clove oil and ink. "Our queen is not a private woman. If she favors a foreign stall, that favor becomes a rumor. If she favors a human, rumor becomes a weapon. There are clans that would call it weakness. There are rivals who would call it corruption. There are fools who would call it romance and begin singing before anyone has died." The word romance landed badly. Elias hated that his face warmed, because Vosek had the eyes of a man who collected evidence in jars. "I sell stew," Elias said, "and men have been poisoned by water. Do not admire innocence merely because it arrives in a bowl." Vosek placed a sealed paper on the counter. "Leave. I can have your trade bond declared fulfilled by dawn. You return home with payment, pride, and your fingers. The queen remembers whatever she chooses. The city remains intact." It was exactly what Elias had come for. 90 days reduced to 3 weeks. The river bell saved. His mother's kitchen safe from creditors. Bishop the Mule vindicated in every cynical opinion he had ever held. The offer was so reasonable it felt cruel. "I will consider it," Elias said. "You will decide by dawn." Vosek paused, then looked at the pies at last. "Are those good?" Elias stared. "I am not immune to smell," the minister said. Elias sold him 2 at full price. That evening Majura arrived hooded and found him burning onions, which was as close to public despair as a cook could come. He told her about the offer because he was bad at lying and because something in him had begun to distrust any silence that might make a decision for them. "He oversteps," she said, and the air around her changed. "He may also be right," Elias answered. "I came here to save a tavern, not to make your throne harder to sit on. You think leaving removes danger. It removes me." That is not the same thing. It might be enough. She stepped closer beneath the awning, too tall for its human beams, too controlled for the anger in her eyes. Do you want to leave? Elias looked at the market. Grutha pretending not to listen, Hadrek sharpening the same knife for the 4th time, Brooke watching from behind a basket as if betrayal had a smell. No. Then do not decide from fear wearing another person's voice. He tried to smile. That sounds carved on a door. It should be. Many doors are stupid. What will you do? Handle Vosok. Majura. She looked at him, and he said the thing that frightened him more than the minister had. Do not punish him for noticing something true. And what truth did he notice? Elias could explain broth for an hour. He could explain the patience required to pull sweetness from an onion. He had no such confidence with this. That this stall matters to you, he said at last, and that it matters to me that it matters. Majura lowered her eyes first, not in surrender, but as if he had placed something fragile in her hands, and she refused to let the market see her learn its weight. Serve me whatever you have not ruined with worry. So he did. The next morning she let Vosok speak before the council. Then she asked whether the throne of Varkazul was so weak that a bowl of stew could unseat it. No clan volunteered to answer yes. She asked whether orc strength required tasteless food. The war priest developed a cough. She asked whether anyone wished to challenge her right to eat where she pleased. General Obrecht stepped on one ambitious lord's foot before the man could discover courage. By noon, a market protection writ had been issued. It said licensed vendors could not be threatened by court officials without charge or cause. It made fairness into law, which in politics was often more dangerous than affection. Vosok kept his office. He also returned for hand pies and paid exact change. This crust, he admitted, chewing with visible resentment, is inconveniently excellent. I'll put that on the sign, Elias said. Do not. Majura came less often after that, because protecting the stall in law meant distancing it from rumor. Elias understood. Understanding did not keep him from setting aside a bowl at dusk and pretending it was only in case a late customer arrived. When she did not come, he ate it himself after the broth had lost the precise heat he had intended. Food made for someone absent always tasted slightly wrong. In the palace, Majura ate what was placed before her and found every dish wearing someone else's meaning. Venison meant tribute, liver meant endurance, bitter roots meant priestly approval, fruit meant a southern treaty, and victory broth tasted mainly of men watching to see whether she praised it. Hunger, she discovered, could be educated into longing. She disliked longing. It had no use in council and no respect for sleep. One night after petitions that began with a mining collapse and ended with 2 cousins attempting to duel over a goat neither owned, Majura dismissed her attendants and went to the old training yard behind the palace. The sand there remembered every blow. She took up a practice blade and worked through forms until sweat cooled on her skin. Strike, turn, step, cut. The body obeyed when the mind became tiresome. A small sound came from the gate. Majura turned with a knife already in her hand. Elias stood in the arch with a covered basket and the expression of a man who had discovered, too late, that bringing supper to a queen involved more spears than a recipe suggested. 2 hidden guards appeared. She raised one hand, and they stopped. I can explain, he said. This will be interesting. Brooke's aunt works in the outer kitchens. She said you missed council supper. I said that was none of my business. Then Brooke said queens do not miss meals unless they are planning war or already inside one, which seemed nutritionally alarming. And somehow I am here, with food and poor diplomatic training. The guards looked at Majura. Majura looked at Elias. Elias looked as if he might apologize to the stones. Leave us, she said. When they were alone, he opened the basket on a bench. Steam rose into the cold yard. Inside was a savory custard, baked shallow and golden, with marrow, charred pepper, onion, mountain cheese, and herbs. It smelled rich without heaviness, smoke softened by egg, heat folded into comfort. "What is it?" she asked. "Something for after training, or bad meetings, or goat litigation, which I know nothing about because I am a spoon." "Goat litigation is confidential. I remain a spoon." She took the plate. His hands shook, and she noticed. "Are you afraid?" "Yes." "Of me?" "Partly, mostly of over-steamed eggs." That nearly made her smile. Then she tasted the custard, and the smile became impossible for another reason. It was warm through, soft without weakness, savory with marrow, bright where pepper touched the tongue, sweet underneath with onion. It did not ask her to perform gratitude. It simply met hunger where she had hidden it. "My mother made something like this when the river flooded," Elias said, sitting at the far end of the bench to leave room for rank, fear, and choice. Everyone would come into the tavern wet and angry and pretending not to be scared. She said eggs were for mornings, but a flood did not deserve rules. "You miss her. Every day. Less like a wound now, more like a room I still walk into by mistake." The yard held the words. Mazura looked down at the plate. "My mother died when I was 12. She taught me to gut fish and count lies at feasts. She hated ceremonial food. Said anything that needed a priest to explain the flavor had already failed as supper." Her voice did not break. She would not have permitted it. "After she died, every meal was watched, whether I ate enough, whether grief made me weak. I learned to swallow everything." Elias did not pity her loudly. He did not reach too quickly. He only nodded once, as if she had passed him a hot pan and trusted him not to drop it. "Then I am glad I brought too much." Mazura tore bread, dragged it through the remaining custard, and closed her eyes for half a second. Elias saw. She knew he saw. Neither of them looked away quickly enough. "You have made him worse," Gruther told Elias. "I've made him employed. You taught him to say mouthfeel. Yes, that may have been a crime." Vosek continued to appear twice a week, always claiming inspection. Hadrek carved a better sign, larger, with orcish letters above the human ones. The new sign said, "The Little Hearth," though Elias later learned the literal translation was, "The small fire that refuses to die," which he liked better, and pretended not to. The 90-day mark approached. Letters arrived from Greyhaven. The merchant house acknowledged the bond with language so bitter Elias could taste it through the page. The river bell would be released from debt. His old neighbor wrote that the tavern's roof still leaked over the back room, that the brewer's son had married badly but enthusiastically, that several men had asked when Elias would return, and whether he had been eaten. There was a pressed river reed inside the letter. Elias held it for a long time. Mazura came late. No hood, no armor, only a dark cloak, and the simple leather of a woman who had escaped the palace by patience rather than stealth. The market had emptied under a cold, clear sky. Elias was alone, cleaning a pot already clean. "You have the look of a man scrubbing a decision," she said. He smiled without much strength. "It's a stubborn decision. Most are." He took the Greyhaven letter from under the ledger and set it on the counter. "The bond is fulfilled." Mazura did not touch the paper. "Good. Yes. Is it?" He huffed a laugh. "You could make cruelty out of a question if you wanted." "I often do." "I know." The fire clicked softly. Somewhere far up the terraces, horns sounded the changing of the night watch. Elias wiped the same spot on the counter with his thumb. "I thought it would feel simple," he said. "Pay the debt, go home, unlock the tavern, stand in my mother's kitchen and be exactly where I fought to be. And now I think I built a second kitchen by accident." Mazura looked at the pot, the sign, the stool, the shelves lowered for human hands, the orc-sized bowls stacked beside clay cups he had ordered because children kept burning their fingers. She saw what he perhaps did not. Not a novelty, not a legal trick, but a place made real through repetition. Firelit, food served, names learned, hunger answered. Such places were not conquered. They were grown. "What do you want?" she asked. He groaned softly. "You and that question. It remains useful. It remains rude. Useful things often are." He looked at her then, and the humor between them thinned into something quieter. "I want the river bell saved. It is. I want my mother's name not erased. It won't be. But I don't know if going back there means honoring her or hiding inside what she built because I'm afraid to build something of my own." Majura was silent for long enough that he knew she was choosing truth with care. "When I took the throne," she said, "I believed I was preserving my father's city. Then I learned preservation can become a softer word for fear. A city is not honored by freezing it in the shape the dead last touched. It is honored by keeping it alive enough to change." Elias swallowed. That sounded rehearsed. "It took me 6 years. Good years. Terrible." He laughed, and she almost smiled. She placed one hand on the counter. The scars over her knuckles caught the firelight. "If you leave because you want to, I will see that you travel safely. If you stay because others demand it, I will remove them. If you stay because you are afraid to leave, I will call you a coward until you become angry enough to decide properly." "That is oddly supportive. I am new at this." He covered his face with both hands for a moment, then dropped them. "I don't want to leave." The words came out simple. He had expected drama. Instead, he felt only a loosening, like a knot in dough, finally giving under patient pressure. Majura's fingers curled once against the counter. "Then do not." "It's not that simple." "No," she said, "but it is that clear." He nodded. Then, because feeling too much made him practical, he reached for a wrapped bundle on the shelf. "I made something," he said. "For the stall?" "For you." The words changed the air. Majura went very still. Elias did not look at her while unwrapping the bundle, which was perhaps wise. Inside was a shallow black clay dish covered with a lid sealed in cloth. When he lifted it, steam unfurled slowly, carrying a scent unlike anything he had served before. Smoky pepper, roasted marrow, onion darkened almost to sweetness, bitter greens, apple vinegar, browned butter, and beneath it all the warm grain scent of barley baked until the edges crisped. "It doesn't have a name yet," he said too quickly. "I started with my mother's barley bake, then used your mountain barley, roasted first. Bone marrow folded through, charred northern peppers, scraped so the smoke stays without all the fury. Bitter greens because you like things that argue a little. Apples cooked down with vinegar, not sweet, just enough to cut the fat. Black breadcrumbs browned in butter and crushed pepper on top." He stopped, aware that he had been speaking like a man fleeing silence. "It may be terrible." He stopped, aware that he had been speaking too fast. "It may be terrible." "It is never terrible when you talk that much." "That is not universally true." Majura took the spoon he offered. The dish was not beautiful in a delicate way. It was dark gold and green and brown, edges crisp, center soft, steam rising in steady breaths. It looked like food for cold weather, for after battle, for before sleep, for someone who had spent too many years being fed symbols and too few being fed kindness. She tasted. At first came the crisp top, buttery and peppered, then the yielding barley beneath, each grain separate but bound by marrow into richness. Smoke moved through it without taking over. The greens brought bitterness, the vinegar brightness, the apple a memory of sweetness rather than sweetness itself. Heat built slowly, not as attack, but as company. It tasted of Varkazul's mountains and of a human kitchen by a river. It tasted strong without demanding hardness. It tasted like being understood by someone who had paid attention. Majura set the spoon down. Elias's face tightened. "Too much vinegar? No. Pepper? No. Texture? I worried the barley would go heavy if it sat. and then the crumb would go soft, and I considered serving the crumb separately, but that felt like cowardice and also too many dishes. Elias. He stopped. Majura touched the rim of the dish with her thumb. Once. Then she rested both hands around it, though it was too hot, though queens did not cradle food in market stalls while the night watch horns faded above them. Her expression did not break. It opened, very slightly, which was more. "You made a place," she said, his brow furrowed. "A dish. No." Her voice was low. "A place." He understood then, or thought he did. Food as shelter. Food as answer. Food as the little room inside the enormous city where she could set down the part of herself everyone wanted to name, use, fear, obey. He had not meant to say love. He would not have dared. But the dish said, "I see the throne and the woman under it. I see the iron and the hunger. I have learned your city and brought you home without taking you from it." His throat worked. "I don't know what to call it." Majura looked at him over the steam. "The Queen's quiet." He stared. "That will cause problems." "Yes. You chose that because it will cause problems. I chose it because it is true." He laughed then, helplessly, softly, and the sound warmed the space between them more than the fire. The next day, the Queen's quiet appeared on the menu without explanation. Brooke returned before dawn, put on his apron, and informed Elias that the name was politically reckless, and the crumb needed more pepper. Grutha declared it sentimental, bought a portion, and ate behind a hanging boar flank where no one could see her face. By noon, customers were ordering it for 3 different reasons: because the Queen's name frightened them, because the smell tempted them, and because Vosok had been seen eating it with the expression of a man reviewing every mistake of his youth. Majura came at sunset in full armor. The market saw her. A queen in Varkazul did not become invisible by wishing it, and this time she did not try. Conversations faltered. Backs straightened. A child with apple bun on both cheeks bowed so quickly she nearly fell. Majura crossed the stone lane and stopped before the stall. "Majesty," Elias said, because the market needed him to. "Cook," she replied, because the market needed that too. 1 Queen's quiet. He served it in a black clay bowl warmed by the fire. He added the crumb at the last moment, so it crackled faintly over the soft barley beneath. He placed buttered bread beside it, because he knew her, and a little charred pepper oil at the edge, because she would pretend not to need it and use it anyway. She paid the proper price. That mattered. The Queen did not gift him favor. The cook did not offer tribute. They made an exchange in the open, simple and exact, while the city watched and struggled to decide what story it wanted to tell. Majura took the bowl to the bench Hadrek had built, and Grutha had reinforced after declaring humans unfit for furniture engineering. Elias returned to the stove. Customers came, bowls left, coins rang, and the sun slid behind the terraces until Varkazul's smoke glowed red. When the rush thinned, she spoke without looking at him. "The name is causing argument. I warned you. Good argument. That exists. It will now." He smiled into the pot. "I am honored to have contributed to civic confusion." She took another bite. Her thumb rested against the bowl. "You are staying." It was not a question, but it gave him room. "Yes. And the river bell? My neighbor's daughter wants to run it. She has better sense than I do, which is ideal in tavern management. I'll send recipes. Visit, maybe. Varkazul will consider collapsing out of spite. Cities are dramatic. This one is." He looked around at the lowered shelf, the orcish sign, Brooke teaching a child to blow on a spoon before tasting, Grutha pretending not to listen, and the Queen sitting under his awning with a dish named for what she could not show in court. The city was still too large. It always would be. But somewhere inside its vastness, he had made a small place that answered back. "When I arrived," he said, "I thought Varkazul was built to remind me I didn't belong. It was built before anyone considered your convenience. I noticed. And now, Now it is still too large, but I know where to stand. Majura's gaze moved to him. The softness there was brief and private despite the open market. Good. He wanted foolishly to reach for her hand. He did not. Not because he was afraid of the city, though he remained fond of breathing, but because some dishes collapsed if pulled from the oven too soon. Instead, he placed an extra piece of buttered bread beside her bowl without comment. That was not included in the price, she said. Quality control. I am your queen. I am aware. You give your queen unauthorized bread? Recklessly. Her mouth curved, small and real. Continue. So he did. Weeks turned. Snow appeared on the upper terraces and melted before reaching the lower market. The little hearth gained a second counter and a roof beam carved with tiny bowls by children who lied badly about having knives. Elias learned to bargain in Orcish and to swear in it with devastating grammatical errors. Brooke learned pastry so fine that Gruther accused him of treason against chewing. Vosek drafted market regulations with suspicious elegance. Majura kept coming, sometimes in armor, sometimes hooded before dawn, sometimes only through a guard carrying an empty black dish and a note. Too much sweetness in the last version. Do not indulge the Western apple merchants. They did not declare anything. Declarations were for war, taxes, and people with less patience than cooks. What grew between them grew through smaller acts. A bowl kept warm, a path cleared through market crowds, a question asked honestly, a truth answered without spectacle. The city adjusted because cities, despite their pride, are made of people, and people forgive much for good bread. Soldiers carried hand pies to the border. Children grew up thinking pepper dumplings were traditional. Old warriors argued that softness had always been a form of strength if properly seasoned. And sometimes, when dusk settled red on the mountain walls, Queen Majura Karag sat beneath the awning of the little hearth with a black bowl in her hands, her scars catching the firelight, her face unreadable to the city, and known in fragments to the man at the stove. Elias talked too much about onions or dough or the politics of turnips, and she answered with 5 words that somehow contained an entire conversation. The stall remained small, the city remained vast. Neither fact defeated the other. There are forms of courage too quiet for songs in halls built of black stone. A man can cross a continent not with a sword, but with a soup pot and a debt he refuses to let devour him. A queen can risk more by accepting warmth than by facing a blade. In a city that measured worth by scars, 2 unlikely people found another language: bread broken, broth shared, hunger noticed, care given without announcement. And because of that, the small fire kept burning.